Welcome back to Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Metzger from University of Central Florida Police Department, and he is on the board of the National Association for Mental Illness. He also just won an award for Community Hero for Mental Health. And so I am really looking forward to this conversation today. Welcome to the show, Chief Metzger. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Paige. I'm excited to be here.
Of course, we actually just connected a couple days ago and we were looking at the schedule, and usually it's kind of like, how can we schedule this out? And we both were like, I think excited about it. We're like, let's just do it now. Like, let's get it done. Let's have this conversation. So it's fresh. I'm excited. I really think that you have a lot of knowledge on mental health, and it's going to be a really valuable conversation today. So thank you again for your time.
Well, thank you. And, I want to do some good. So if I can help one person, then it's worth it.
Absolutely. So 37 years, that is a long time to be in law enforcement. Maybe give us a little bit of background. What did those 37 years look like for you?
Sure. I spent the first 26 years of my career at the Orlando Police Department and did just about everything you can do in law enforcement, everything from mounted to various detective assignments. One of our local drug task forces, I was the commander of the narcotics unit. And ultimately, I retired as a deputy chief. And I've been here at the University of Central Florida for the last 11 years, the last seven as chief. And for a lot of members of the audience, they probably don't know that UCF is one of the largest universities in the United States. We have over 70,000 students, 70,000, and about 13,000 faculty and staff.
Wow. That's a lot. And when we talked a little bit, because I'm from Phoenix, and you said that you are the second largest next to Arizona State University.
Yes.
However, there's a caveat to that because ASU, if no one knows, has multiple locations, kind of like subsectors around the state or around the city. And so if we take all of that together, yes, it's bigger, but it's really not as a main campus bigger than you guys, right?
It's more of a, I think of it as a system.
Yeah.
So, the Arizona State system, they have multiple medium and large campuses, but our main campus is very big. Is I think bigger than any of their single campuses, even
Yeah.
their Tempe campus.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really am interested to hear, you coming from Orlando and now working at University of Central Florida, what differences do you see in the job? Like maybe different focuses or different stressors that you see between the two.
Yeah, well, the first is we do have more time to provide service.
Mm.
So our officers are able to slow down, take their time, and provide a higher standard of care where you just don't have time to do that all the time with a city police department or a sheriff's office. And we want our officers to be officer friendly when they can, and to do the little things. And whether it's they see someone lost on campus, and we have a large campus, and people come here to visit. They're doing tours. They get lost. We want our officers to stop and help them
Yeah.
and provide that extra customer service, if you will. But then when bad things happen, they need to flip that switch in their head and take care of business. So I think our biggest issue is probably complacency, where you get lulled into this false sense of security where nothing will happen here. And then lo and behold, it does. Because we do have bad things that do happen around us and sometimes on campus. And we had an officer who was luckily she was only cut on the arm when the person tried to cut her throat. And this was a mentally ill individual on campus, and she responded to a call and thought that she was going to help this person who claimed to be a victim of a kidnapping. And as soon as she walked up, she was attacked. So that's just one example of many. And so we need to be on our game, but by the same token, be nice. And then the next difference is just the population. Our core population is 17 to 24-year olds. And that is the population where mental illnesses reveal themselves.
Mhm.
So if someone's going to develop bipolar or schizophrenia, it's during that time period. In most cases, it's our students' first time away from home. They're lonely, they're depressed, and sometimes they don't make good decisions. So we need to get them through that time period where they're immature and growing up, and try to help launch them into their adulthood. So that's a big difference between just being a city police officer where you have a whole range of ages. And then mental health, again, is our number one focus area because so many of our 70,000 students on any given day are in crisis. And we have to get them through that. And in some cases, we're literally talking students off the tops of our parking garages who are threatening to jump. And we do it very, very well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for explaining, the differences that you're seeing. And I do want to talk about the mental health side of things because I know when we talked offline, that is a number one priority for your community that you're serving, but also for your officers and for everyone within your agency. And, obviously mental health is something that's a passion of yours. You're on the board for NAMI and I said in your intro, you just won an award. Why has mental health been so important to you? And, how did you get involved in this mental health space?
Well, first, my youngest son, Daniel, ultimately he spent 10 years of his life with severe mental illness, and so it was important to me to learn how to deal with him and navigate those challenges. I recognized how I needed to change and adapt. And when I did get to UCF, I applied some of what I learned in dealing with Daniel to dealing with our students. We were the first agency in Central Florida to be 100% CIT trained and certified crisis intervention team, and that's because our population required it. We had those calls every single day, and we couldn't always count on a CIT trained officer to be available. So everyone needed it. I went through it as a deputy chief, and I recognized the value of having that training, and it's actually applicable in so many other areas beyond just mental health calls, that de-escalation skill. Um, I use some of those skills with Daniel at home. And I love to use the Denzel Washington Man on Fire analogy. I watched Daniel get Baker acted 8 times,
Mhm.
and some of those officers and deputies were CIT trained, and some weren't. And it was very obvious when they weren't.
Mhm.
Uh, I mean, when they were trained, they were able to talk, de-escalate, get Daniel into the handcuffs, into the back of a patrol car, and take him to a facility. No muss, no fuss. When they weren't trained, things went off the rails, and sometimes I needed to jump in and intervene because they just couldn't do it. They didn't know what they were doing, and it wasn't their fault. They lacked the training. So I do think that every police officer in the United States should have CIT training. I think that we're at that point, that time in society where it should be a requirement, and it shouldn't be this 20% of the agency or 25%. That's the old Memphis model, and that's the old way of thinking about it. I think if an agency wants to get with the times and properly serve their population, their citizens, everyone gets it.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing that. And, I have had conversations with other leaders who have mentioned that, a lot of their calls are due to mental health.
They
And
are.
I think that you're spot on that if you're seeing that as like, hey, like a lot of these calls are calls for mental health, then having everyone trained to be able to effectively handle those calls in a way that's safe and again, like I said, effective and efficient, then I think that you're spot on. There should be training for everybody.
And it's free. The
Yeah,
only the only the only thing you have to pay for is the time for your officers and deputies to go through it.
yeah. No, I love that. And I I always have, I've said this in the past, I think our life experiences and our life challenges are an opportunity for us to learn and to grow and to help others. Do you think that the experiences that you went through have allowed you to have that deeper level of understanding and empathy and have made you a better leader because of it?
Without a doubt. Without, and I gave my a little speech when the Mental Health Association presented me with that award a few days ago, and I talked about Daniel's legacy,
Mhm.
and his legacy is that we are 100% CIT trained at the UCF Police Department. That we actually developed a refresher class for all of our officers to go through every single year. We practice it. And it made me a better person, a better leader, a better chief, a better husband, a better father, learning patience, learning that empathy, um, understanding that it's difficult to deal with someone under those conditions, and you do have to um, slow down and understand that they don't understand what's happening to them. And it's the hardest thing that I've ever had to go through. Many days I'd be driving home in tears, crying about my son, and it's made me better. But it's also made the agency better, my officers better, and that's Daniel's legacy is that impact on me and on all of my people, and they understand that too. They know my story because I've shared it with them.
Yeah. I'm like getting teary-eyed here. Um, I appreciate your ability to be vulnerable and open and honest and to talk about your life experiences. I think that that's a sign of a really good leader to say, like, I've struggled with these things and it's helped me to be better. And because of that, I want you guys to be better. I think that's amazing. And I was getting really teary-eyed and I don't want to like
No,
cry
I
on.
don't want to tell the rest of the story because Daniel, he spent 3 years in various programs, the last 3 years of his life, and he spent a year at a facility, and he was doing so well, working at Goodwill. And we ultimately checked him out and moved him into an apartment. He had a girlfriend, and he had a job interview at McDonald's the next day. He had conquered his problems with alcohol. But what we didn't know, and we found out later when we read his journals, that he had tried cocaine. And for someone with debilitating anxiety like he had, that was a way to treat that and to give himself some confidence going into that and reduce his anxiety. And unfortunately, he overdosed and died as a result. That was August of 23 and actually August 16th of 2023. So, and that's so it's been a very hard time for my wife and myself dealing with that. But the way we cope with it is by helping others. So, my wife Linda teaches NAMI family to family class, helping others navigate those challenging times with their loved one who may be suffering from mental illness. And then I teach CIT, and specifically I teach question, persuade, refer, suicide prevention, with the focus on saving law enforcement from and preventing suicide amongst our brothers and sisters in blue.
And you didn't share that with me offline, and I can't imagine the pain of losing a child. And I am so sorry for,
It's
I know that that doesn't make things easier, but I can't imagine that pain. I do really commend you for saying, he has a legacy. And because of this, like we want to help others and we want to turn this pain into something that can help other people. I think that sometimes that's all we can do is take our pain and try to do good with it. And I would love if you could dive a little bit more into the work that you're doing in suicide prevention. And I know you kind of explained a little bit of those bullet points, but what does that look like? What does that training look like? Maybe some of the details so that everyone can understand, how you're doing that suicide prevention training.
Absolutely. Um, I've been teaching QPR. I had been teaching to civilians for a few months, and then we lost, and it was an Orange County lieutenant, and locally that so many of us knew, we knew it was a problem in the ranks of law enforcement. You read about it, but when it hits you personally, you realize how important it is. So I started teaching it at all of the CIT classes in Orange County and Brevard County. And so it starts with recognizing the signs and what does that look like. And some of the signs are if someone is irritable or angry when they aren't, their behavior changes, sleeplessness, when they start talking about giving up or just wanting to go to sleep and never wake up. And they say things that are oftentimes vague, but when you listen to it, where they're going. Like I just want to give up, or I just can't go on anymore. Or sometimes if it could be in your face, where I want to kill myself, or I want to commit suicide. They may say it like that, and then there's no ambiguity there. But usually not, right? Usually they're going to say something. I feel like I'm a burden on my family. I'm a disappointment. Um, my wife has left me, or you realize that they're drinking and that's how they're coping. And alcohol, it becomes a big problem and it exacerbates the problem.
Yeah.
But we train, and I train our officers, and we have dispatchers in there too, and corrections, um, to recognize those signs, to hear those statements, and then I want to empower them to follow up,
Mhm.
because we talked about it before, Paige, that we're great in law enforcement at getting into strangers' business on the street,
Mhm.
but we are terrible at getting into our brothers and sisters' business. We feel like that's their private lives, and we really don't want to do that. We feel like it's not our place, with our squad mates, our colleagues, our friends on shift, when it's our responsibility to do that. And really, I would call it an obligation to
Yeah.
follow up and ask. If someone says, I just can't do this anymore, I can't go on, and you need to ask the question. So Q in QPR is question. So you ask the question. Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Are you thinking about killing yourself? You're making these statements. I'm worried. I'm concerned about you. And listen, it is an entire myth that if you bring up suicide to someone or ask them about suicide, that it'll plant a seed or cause them to think about it when they weren't otherwise. That doesn't happen. That's not real life. That's a myth. Um, and it's been my experience, and I've asked this question many times in real world. People will sigh and they'll be relieved that you're willing to put yourself out there and be real with them. And it's been my experience that they'll be honest about it. And if they have been thinking about it, they'll tell you. Is it possible that they'll lie? It is. But I keep pressing, right? I keep asking. And even if they say I'm not thinking about it, I say, well, you're having problems, you're struggling. I still think we need to do something to help you, and
Yeah.
let's get some help. So that's the question part, and we practice that. We role play it so that, and I tell them by the end of the day, it's a 2 hour block. Um, I want them to have practiced asking the question, because asking someone about suicide is not easy. It's not normal.
Mhm.
And then the P part is persuade. You need to persuade them into getting help. And I say very first thing you have to do, you take away their gun, right? I mean, and you can imagine that is a problem in and of itself, because we identify so closely with our firearms in law enforcement. Um, but it's a key. You can't leave them with the gun. And I was teaching some classes in Brevard County, two different classes in a row. And it was a very small class, one of my smallest classes of 8. Two of the eight had already done this, had already taken guns away from their squad mates and driven them to facilities. And in the other class, it was double that. It was 16, and we had two out of the 16. That
Mm.
was just back-to-back classes. And I've one class I taught on a Tuesday, and on a Thursday night, one of my students had to do this exact thing, take a gun away and take a colleague to a facility. And the next morning, or the next day was her graduation, and she shared that. So it happens, and so I want to prepare all of us to be able to have the conversation, to ask the question, and then persuade. And it's not asking, are you willing to? I tell them, don't ask whether they're willing to go, right? You say, okay, we need to go to a facility, and we have facilities here in Central Florida who have programs specifically tailored for law enforcement. I actually have I have pamphlets, and you call a number, they meet you at the back door, they admit law enforcement in under an alias, and they have a program specific for law enforcement. So they're not mixed in with the general population. We don't want that. And there are a couple of facilities here in Central Florida that do that. And so I share that with my class. So there's no question about they're not going to take them just to where everyone else might go and be mixed in with the general population. And we say we're going to go. So which pair of shoes would you like to wear? Or which shirt? No, let's find some clothes for you. Don't give them a chance. And if they push back, push back, push back, then we call for help. Right? We have mobile crisis here in Central Florida, and we want an ally. So we want to bring somebody else in. Say, okay, well then we're going to wait for mobile crisis to show up because you need to do something. We need to help you today, right now, because I'm not leaving you. And that's the other key is you don't leave them when if they say yes that I'm thinking about suicide, they are not to leave. We're not to leave their side until we either put them in a car with us and drive them, or we get someone there to help us and to help them get help. And then the refer is taking them to a location or getting someone else on board to assist us with helping them. And then that's the QPR. And it's highly effective. It's a great program. Uh, we we've had many saves, and just right here at UCF, we've had a couple of individuals, a couple of our officers who were suicidal, and we got them the help they needed. And one of them was 8 years ago. They're now married and living their best life, and the other turned it around, was doing great, and retired, and now they're teaching at a high school. So, and that's just from little old UCF. And there are plenty of other stories all around the country when and that stigma that there would be consequences if you're outed. I think that's old school thinking. I think law enforcement has moved with the times. I can't vouch for every agency, but certainly the agencies I'm aware of, if someone asks for help and says, I'm struggling right now and I need help, they're going to get it. And Paige, I think you and I spoke about it. It's the equivalent of a medical condition. This is medical. So if someone had cancer and they needed to recover, they were going through chemo and they've been weakened, but they want to come back, and so you put them at a desk job on light duty. They recover, they get healthy again. You put them back on the road. Well, it's the same thing for mental health. They're sick, they're ill. You want them to get healthy, you want them to get better. And so you put them on desk job, a light duty job, and when they're finally able to get back and they're willing to go back, you put them back on the road. And that's been my experience that um, people do get well. And the key to QPR is offering hope that things can and will get better, and they generally do. And so I could tell you about many other stories of success utilizing QPR and getting people back so that they're happy and living their best lives.
Thank you. I am such a big fan of tactical steps for progress. And I really appreciate your approach of saying, hey, Because I think that there is, there's obviously talk about mental health and suicide prevention, and it's like this is a focus, but it's okay, well, what are the steps that are being taken to provide that training and that support? And so I really appreciate you saying, here it is, QPR. This is exactly what we do. This is what we train. This is how we do it. And it's very specific, and I really appreciate that because I think that in order for there to be forward progress and that success, there has to be those actionable ways of doing it and that training. There were a few things that I wrote down when you said it, for the question. I think that from what I've heard, there's fear, right? There's fear that for asking the question. They, like you said, they don't want to get in their business or don't want to make someone mad or whatever that is. And so by empowering them to say, like, no, this is actually really good and they appreciate it. And it's your responsibility to ask that question to potentially save a life. And if they lie, you guys are police officers. You're gonna be able to sniff out a lie pretty quickly, right?
I
It's
think
like
so. That's right.
like
Yeah,
like you're
we're trained to detect that deception, and so
yep.
you just keep on pressing, you keep on asking, and to kind of don't take no for an answer.
Yeah. No, and I really appreciate that because it's not like, oh, well, I asked and they said no. And so like I thought maybe they were not telling the truth, but then that was like where the road ended. So that consistency and that persistence. The other thing that you said, and I had actually a conversation with this, but in a different context recently, you said taking away the gun. And I had someone say one time, and I'm curious your insights on this. They said, it's if someone is contemplating taking their life, they have their gun on them all the time. It's something that you put on top of your fridge or in, the laundry room or in your bedside table or wherever it is that you store it at home. And so it's this quote unquote easy access to something that could accomplish that. And we were talking about how, if someone is struggling with alcoholism, you wouldn't want to put a bottle on top of the fridge or in the laundry room or on the bedside table. And so this idea of like, hey, if they are and that and they've admitted that, then taking away that like easy access to that thing is something that should happen.
Yes, and I talk about safety planning.
Mhm.
Um, there's, I think there's this misnomer when it comes to suicide that if you take away the gun, then they'll take pills. So take away the pills, or they'll find a knife, or and so there's a couple of points that I'd like to make regarding this. Um, Most law enforcement suicides are with firearms for obvious reasons. It's our familiarity with them, and the fact that we have them, and it's usually the officer's own service weapon in the
Mhm.
majority of cases. Most officers are going to own more than one gun. So that means you need to take all the guns away if they're going to be in the house. But ideally, there you go. Um, Ideally, you would take away the gun and then get them to a facility right away, right? And the window of time where someone has it is willing to take action towards dying by suicide is pretty narrow. It's very, very short. In some cases, it's as short as 15 minutes. In 75% of the cases, it's less than an hour.
Wow.
It can be as long as a day, but if once you get through that window, they're not going to do it.
Mhm.
So if you get them to a facility and they're stable, and usually it's a 72-hour period that they're held, and they get out, by then we will have arranged for them to go for longer term treatment, and we have several in the state of Florida, and I think every state probably has something. Then they stay there. They're still away from their guns at that point.
Yeah.
But the window is closed. So you don't have to worry at that point. They're past that crisis time. Um, so that was one aspect of it. And the other is this concept of coupling that people think that if you take away the gun, then they're just going to use a knife. Or if you take away the knife, then they're just going to use a pill. Or if you take away the pill, they're just going to hang themselves. And that's not how it works.
Mm,
There's this coupling effect where if someone has it in their mind about how they're going to do it, where they're going to do it, and when they're going to do it, that time, place, location, that's what they do.
mm,
And if you break that coupling, they don't go from the top of a parking garage looking down and say, well, there's a fence there, so I'm going to stop and now I'm going to go and hang myself in the woods. That's not how it works. Um, and again, that window starts to close. There are some parking garages where they have benches, like suicide prevention benches, that if someone sits down for a few minutes, all of a sudden they say, what am I doing? This is crazy.
mm.
And they stop. Uh, and I had to make that argument here on campus. We had three jumpers in 2023. And so we have 10 parking garages and I had to talk our administration into putting up fences. And I'd say that there was a couple people, and they said, "Well, why wouldn't they just go to another garage or do it some other way?" And I had to explain the coupling effect.
Mm,
So the fencing does work. It causes them to pause and they think about it. And when they stop and think, they don't do it. And the Kevin Hines story, and I'll share that real fast.
yeah.
Um, he is famous for jumping off of the Golden Gate Bridge and surviving. He's written books. He speaks all over the world about this. And he said on the way down, "Man, this is a bad idea. I wish I hadn't done this." And he regretted it on the way down, which is a long way down, right? Broke lots of bones, was seriously injured, but he survived. And now he's come back and he's giving back and making a difference. I actually had the chance to meet him. I've spoken about him for years and read his story, but it was just last year he spoke at an event and it was pretty cool to talk to him.
Yeah. I appreciate your knowledge. You've taught me a lot today that I didn't know. And so I really appreciate you sharing. And, the more awareness and the more conversations and the more education, then the more reach and the more we can save lives. And so, again, I appreciate it. And one thing I wrote down when you were saying this is because you said that you have saved lives and you have direct results to this training. And I think that when people see the success, then there's more trust too. And then that stigma or that fear starts to go away. And it really is this full trust in you guys that you are going to support them and you are here to help them get better. And this idea that like you can come back to the job and like you can heal from this. And I love that you put the two and two together of like if you have an illness like cancer, like you can get better and you can come back to work. And it's the same thing with mental illness. It's the same thing with a physical injury. If you break your ankle, you can get better and you can come back. And so I really appreciate that approach. And then the more you do this, the more trust and the more people are going to be willing to say yes to that help.
And I know a lot of officers and deputies are worried about losing their career, right?
Mm,
If they come out and talk about whatever they're going through. And I think at one time that might have been the case. That's not the case now.
yeah.
And I think it's interesting because the profession creates the conditions that lead to these crises. So
Hmm.
we're causing it. And so it's our responsibility to help them get through it.
Yep.
And I love the balloon analogy where every time we go to one of these calls, these critical incidents, a little more air gets blown into the balloon and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And pretty soon it's so big, it's ready to burst. And if we don't let some air out, we're going to have a problem.
Yep.
And I think that's why some of these measures are so effective. That's why, like QPR, the power tool of QPR is listening.
Hmm.
And while we're listening, even if the person's not suicidal, we're helping them get better, right? They're feeling better by releasing some of that air. That's why counseling is so effective.
Yeah.
Ever since Daniel's death, I've seen a counselor once a month, and I let some air out of the balloon. It makes me feel better. It's important. And so that's why we have CISM, critical incident stress management.
Yep.
And we debrief after every critical incident, whether it's a jumper or traffic crash fatality, or just fill in the blank. We all have those types of incidents. Um, if you debrief them, you're letting some air out of all of those balloons for all of those responders and trying to get ahead of it and prevent on the front end from it becoming a problem on the back end.
Yeah. I love that analogy too, because even as you're saying it, like I'm like exhaling, and everyone knows what it's like to feel lighter after an exhale. Like when you're relieving that stress and you're like, yes, I'm offloading it. And there is another expression I really liked. Someone said like you can't go through a 30-year career, or you can't walk through the mud for 30 years and not expect your boots to be dirty. And it's this idea that like there are going to be things, and those things compound. And how can you have those resources to be able to offload that? Because you are human. And one day that balloon is going to get too big and it's going to burst. And I've had, experiences in my life where I've let it get to that point. And it's not fun to have everything all at once come crumbling down on you. And so, whatever you can be or do to be proactive. And that's what I heard when you said, like, how can we do things on the front end so we don't have to deal with it on the back end? And it's a lot, oh, I don't want to say it's a lot easier. So I think proactive wellness is harder because it takes more of that effort to say, okay, I'm going to do this now. But I will say that it's so much easier to get in front of it than to have to deal with it after the fact.
It's very intentional,
Mhm.
and you have to plan it
Yep.
instead of reacting to it on the back end. But I
Yeah.
agree with you, getting ahead of it makes better sense.
Yeah, 100%. And I know that you talked about, the effectiveness that you have as an organization to help with suicide. I know you talked about, students and jumping and different things, and that you guys have a really effective system to help them. Does that look very similar to what you do organizationally, or is that an entirely different approach?
Oh, I think law enforcement has had to adapt to our changing environment, and the issue of mental health was kind of thrust upon us, with in the 70s when they had issues with asylums, and they were terrible places and underfunded, and so they let a lot of mentally ill people out. They stopped funding it, and then they're out on the street. And now what are we supposed to do? It's law enforcement's problem, and so we've been on the front line at dealing with mental illness, and it's taken a long time since the 1970s, but we're finally, I think, in a really good place, and CIT is a big part of it.
Mhm.
um, that's what's been helpful for us at UCF. We
Yeah.
also hired a mental health clinician. She was part of mobile crisis. Actually, so I'll tell you this quick story. Her name is Delaney Kerwin Moore. She responded to my house for Daniel. And when Daniel was in psychosis, he thought that gangsters, rappers, and demons were out to get him.
Mhm.
But he would only speak to mom and dad about it. He wouldn't share it with strangers or other family members. Delaney came into the house, sat down on the floor with him, and he disclosed everything. I said, "This is a special person, and she's amazing." And so when came time for us to hire someone, who do you think I called? I
Mhm.
called Delaney, but she was starting a behavioral response unit with the Orange County Sheriff's Office, and that was a pilot program. And that's a co-responder program, which I think is the best way for us to respond. We have a clinician in a patrol car with a sworn officer, because if you think of the calls for service you can respond to when you have someone, a sworn member, um, that increases the percentage of calls you can respond to. If it's just civilian, if there's any threat of violence or weapons, you can't go, right? But you can when you have a co-responder program. So that's what Orange County's done. Now, my former agency has just started that as well, Orlando PD. So I'm a big fan of that. And so we have our clinician. She responds with us when she's on duty. And so I'm a big fan of that. So back to your question, here we have the threat management team, and Delaney manages those students who are threats to themselves. is just about suicide prevention with her and keeping our students alive, honestly. And she has saved lives personally, and it's been an amazing journey. And I'm very proud of her and that program.
Yeah, no, I love that. And um, I love that you had a personal connection with her and you recognized that she was special. And it goes back to what you said before about also having individuals in place that are used to working in certain environments with certain demographics. You know, we talk about it in the context of law enforcement as like having culturally competent, right? Having people
Right.
understand the people that they're working with, and that's how you can be effective. And so I'm so happy that you found someone, because there's a lot of agencies across the country that struggle with that, finding resources and people who are effective within the particular demographics.
Right.
Yeah.
We're blessed, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple more questions for you. I know that we're running over, and I'm
Can we
hoping,
do UCF restores? We talk about, I would love
yes.
to talk about UCF restores and share that with your audience. Um, at UCF, we have a program. It was developed by Dr. Deborah Beidel, and it started with the military, and it's the premier treatment program for PTSD. And she received some large grants. She did a lot of research and is augmented reality. So she places the person suffering from PTSD back into the situation that caused it in the first place. So the sight, sounds, and smells, and whether like with the veterans, it was diesel fuel or the smell of gunpowder or explosives in the air. And they would repeatedly go through it to the point where they overcame their PTSD and they would be symptom free. 76% success rate. Most programs, if they achieve 50%, they're happy.
Yeah.
So highly effective. And so again, military is where they started, and then we had Pulse here in Orlando. My former agency and my friends and colleagues responded, and some of them suffered from PTSD as a result of Pulse, and they came here and got better. I
Mhm.
mean, say she opened her doors for our officers, and it's been a godsend and a blessing. And then she opened it up to firefighters and other first responders. And now we have first responders from all over the country coming to Orlando and getting this free treatment and getting better and living their best lives. So I think the world needs to know, our law enforcement world around the country needs to know that this resource is here. It's effective. There is hope to overcome this. And I'm not saying that it's easy because you have to relive some of those moments, some of the worst moments of your life, but it's worth it. And I was just at an event over in Citrus County, which is about 2 hours west. I was a keynote for another NAMI event. And I just started talking to a Citrus County deputy out of the blue. And I said I was from UCF. And he said, "Oh, I've been to the Restores program because I was involved with a serious incident." And he's saying its praises and said it saved his career and made a difference. So um, it's out there, but I just really want people to know that that's something they should look into, and they can Google UCF Restores and find it, and there's contact information there.
Thank you. And, when you told me about this, when we first talked, I was blown away by those numbers. And I've never ever heard of anything like that before. And I think that, and maybe you can tell me if you think it's a myth or like a common misconception that, I've heard so many times, like, you don't want people to relive things. Like, you don't want people to have to experience that or go to that place mentally. But this is saying, it's almost like that saying of like, the only way out is through. And so it's saying, hey, like we are gonna bring you back to that place in great realistic detail with sights, smells, sounds, visuals. And then when you get through to the other end, you're going to feel better. And so, do you think that, I mean, have you heard that before, or do you think that's a common misconception that people are like, no, definitely don't revisit that? Because obviously, this is taking the opposite approach and it's having major success.
Yeah, I think that's a misconception. I do.
Hmm.
And the science has proven that now
Yeah.
that that this approach does work and talking about it does work. Ignoring it, your mind doesn't ignore it, right?
Mhm.
You just not talking about it doesn't mean that you aren't thinking about it in the recesses of your mind or dreaming about it at night when you're asleep. And so it's there. And so bringing it out into the open and getting through it, I think is the best approach. And again, I'm definitely biased because yeah, I've had these conversations and seen Dr. Bidell's her presentations. I've seen it several times, and the numbers speak for themselves.
Right. Yeah, I mean, those are fantastic numbers. And maybe I can just put a little link in the description
Love
with,
that.
a link that goes directly so that anyone who's listening to this can click on that, educate themselves, and, see the resource that is available to them. Because, like
That's
you said,
fantastic.
it's there. And so, yeah, thank you for bringing that to our attention. I'll make sure I put that in there. Um,
Thank you.
I wanted to ask two more questions. I know we talked a little bit about this, and there's this idea that there has to be a little bit of awareness with these things, whether it's suicidal ideations, mental illness, PTSD, like whatever it is, or PTSI, whatever it is that, is going on. And you said, you can't treat an illness unless you know that there's an illness. And so how do you think people can identify that within themselves? We've already talked about how maybe you can identify that within others and the kind of the warning signs and the statements that other people may make, but how do you have that self-awareness that you may need to reach out for those resources?
Yeah, I think that if you are overreacting to circumstances, if you are treating your family poorly, your spouse, your kids, your coworkers, I mean, those are all signs that something is wrong, and that's not how you would normally behave. And make no mistake, the job can do that to you, can get you to that point. If you can't sleep, if you're self-medicating with alcohol or other drugs, those are all warning signs. You should recognize that that's not healthy for you, and that you should do something about it. And we do have treatment programs for both and alcohol for professionals, and whether it's law enforcement, other first responders. We have a program at the University of Florida. I'm an alum, and and Daniel, he did go there for alcohol, but he was in there with doctors and lawyers for the most part,
Mhm.
for professionals. So there are facilities like that, and they're highly effective. And um, but someone should not be suffering that way. But if they recognize it, they need to recognize it in themselves that they need help, and then ask for that help and not be afraid to ask. And that's the hardest part, isn't it? That we we are problem solvers. We don't see ourselves as people with problems, but we have them like everyone else. So we need to overcome that, and that fear that it shows weakness if we ask for help. And that's not true, right? We know that sometimes takes more courage to ask for help, and that's a mindset that we need to encourage in our officers, deputies, and troopers.
100%. And I was thinking that exact same thing where it's like, yes, these things are based in fear, but the courage that it takes to ask for help and raise your hand and reach out for these resources is just that. It's courage. It's not weakness at all. I think that it's the fear that maybe is translated into weakness, but the courage it takes to take action is strength.
I couldn't agree more.
My final question for you, and then I'll let you take the floor if we missed anything else. What words of wisdom would you give to someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
First, that segues very nicely into the book Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement. Kevin Gilmartin is the author, and I will tell you that I received the book 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago now, and I did like what every good cop does. I handed it to my wife and did not read it, right?
Yep.
So fast forward 20 years, and I was at a police chiefs conference here in the state of Florida, and Kevin Gilmartin was speaking, and I listened for an hour, and I was blown away that he described me and why I behaved the way I did when I went home, that emotional roller coaster. And at the end of the day, I had nothing left in the tank, and I was, you're up here, and then all of a sudden you're down here. And
Mhm.
even though the up here may be bad for you, and it may be critical incidents and blood and guts and gore and bad things, the brain still is very turned on by that and likes it.
Mm.
You may not like it, but your brain does, right? Chemically. And then you come down and what do you have? You're nothing left to give your family, your wife, your kids. What do you want to do? Nothing. Where do you want to go? I don't care. What do you want to have for dinner? I don't care. What do you want? Movie? I don't care. And this book, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement, addresses that and offers mitigation measures to deal with it. So, so I listened for an hour. We took a break. I went out and saw my wife at the conference. She was out in the lobby, and I described the book. She said, "Oh, I read that book 20 years ago. It's the reason we're still married." I said, "Wow, that's saying a lot." So
Yeah.
so I went back in and I told Kevin Gilmore, and he said, "Oh, I get that response all the time." So it's required reading for us at the UCF Police Department. I know a lot when at every class I teach now, a handful of people will raise their hand saying they read it. So I highly recommend it, and I highly recommend that spouses, significant others, family members read it. I did a keynote at an academy graduation, and I talked about the book. And fast forward a year later, I was teaching CIT, and two people had graduated from that academy class, and they had bought the book and read it with their significant other, and it made a big difference. And of course, one of my officers came forward and said that he read it with his wife, and it saved his marriage too. So I'm a big fan. I don't get a dime for endorsing it, although I should. But I think that even if you don't read all of it, at least hand it to your significant other and have them read it because I think it'll make a difference. That's one thing as a new officer that I would do. And I would also stress taking care of yourself. You can't help others if you are not your best self. So work out, get sleep, eat right, do all of those things. I mean, they sound very basic, but I'm a big time runner, and if I don't sign up for, so I sign up for a run every year. Usually it was marathons for a long time, and now it's half marathons because I don't have time. But and I love to bike, so I've done the Police Unity Tour 3 times, and I do usually one long bike ride and one half marathon every year, and then some shorter runs. But that's what keeps me sane. That's what keeps me fit and ready to do the job and my best self. And my wife knows if I haven't worked out, I'm grumpy. I'm grumpy Carl and grumpy Chief, and no one wants that, right?
Yeah.
But highly recommend that you take care of yourself first, and you have to set aside the time and schedule the time. And if you do that, then you'll be your best police officer self, your best husband self, wife self, and then you won't be caught with that full balloon ready to burst.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for your
you.
words of wisdom. I have really enjoyed this conversation. I really appreciate everything that you do for mental health in the community, in your organization. It's clear that you are saving lives, and I really appreciate you taking the time with me today.
Thank you so much, Paige. Want to make a difference.
Yeah, you are. I appreciate you. Thank you.